A lot of the rhetoric in these kinds of wellness aspiration books is you can change your mindset. You can let it go. You can go out tomorrow and change your destiny. You can will things with the power of your mind. And if you don't, well, then that's on you. Not enough power, I guess. Sane washing generally refers to something that happens on a more public level, if you're not aware of the term. So sane washing will happen, I don't know, if there's a person in public office or a politician or a leadership position or some celebrity does some narcissistic stuff, maybe some stuff, maybe a lot of narcissistic stuff. They gaslight, they're vindictive, they shift blame, they betray, they lie to the audience, they play the victim, they throw a tantrum. It's usually some combination of all of the things I just listed. And instead of calling this behavior what it is, a narcissistic mess, the media tries to put a normal spin on it, using words to describe the person in question as unpredictable, having a big personality, audacious, assertive, demonstrative, bombastic, driven, angry, creative, disruptor. I mean, talk about putting lipstick on a pig, right? Now, the media has its own problems, right? My guess is if they were to call out a public figure as narcissistic, my guess is that they're just worried that they would be sued, or the media outlet is owned by narcissistic people who don't believe in the concept, or they don't want to lose sponsors, or whatever it is. So they're more likely to call someone as divisive than they are just plain old narcissistic. Now, public figures are public figures, right? They breathe different air than the rest of us. And when they've got money and a lot of power, they're protected from regular life stuff, and they get away with their behavior. The problem I have with sane washing, though, is that it not only normalizes narcissistic behavior to everyone else, like people acting like these adult tantrums are somehow normal, it rewards it, it incentivizes it. And again, I don't care if that means that more people post more of the nonsense, look at me doing something ridiculous stuff online, or post shameful stuff online. I'm not thrilled that they're posting more cruel, baiting, trolling nonsense. But that's not the issue here, right? This issue, and this sane washing issue, relates back to what happens in regular people's relationships. The sane washing by the media in society at large, frankly, the sane washing also happens at a smaller level in regular people's regular lives. Sane washing removes any societal guardrails. In essence, the message that the media reinforces is that it takes that hurtful, manipulative, gaslighting, isolating, invalidating behavior and just washes it into like, look at this audaciously assertive person who just has a big personality. And if it's just assertiveness or just a big personality, then the person in the relationship who is enduring the manipulation, the lying, the gaslighting, the blame shifting, and the all-around emotional abuse, well, if somebody's having a hard time just because somebody's got a big personality, well, the person in the relationship just must be making too big a deal of it. Because after all, they're just in a relationship with someone who just likes a little attention and they're a little unpredictable. Silly you. Why are you being so dramatic? That's the problem with sane washing. There's more and more debate on this word narcissism. Is it a diagnosis? No, it's not a diagnosis. What does it really mean? Ultimately, knowing the traits that comprise narcissism can be useful because understanding this as a thing helps you make sense of something that can seem senseless. Now, that said, what really matters more than the traits, frankly, are the behaviors, the invalidation, the callousness, the selfishness, the quick, capricious anger, the entitlement, the behavior that can turn on a dime, and the unwillingness for them to be accountable for their behavior. And then throw in there that some days don't have these behaviors, and some people don't see the person in your life engaging in these behaviors. All of that just adds to the confusion. Recently, someone said to me, they said, They said, I think things are actually kind of getting better in my relationship because they're cursing at me less and they're insulting me less. The problem is that they're still cursing and insulting, not that they're doing it less. That's not better. That's less bad. And less bad doesn't equal better. And over time, the only way to make one of these relationships work is to silence yourself, abandon yourself, become what they want. And that's the relationship. All of this takes a tremendous toll. And for many people, knowing that this pattern, this collection of traits and behaviors was a thing, it had a name, how it worked, it broke through years of confusion people had in these relationships. Didn't necessarily lighten the pain, but it certainly broke through the confusion. Enablers are often the main perpetrators of sane washing and will use these more general words like creative, big personality, assertive to capture these behaviors. So they'll say things like, oh, come on now, that's not abusive. They're just outspoken. Or they'll say things like, oh, they don't mean anything by it. They just need some attention. All of this sane washing often leaves people back at square one. Maybe it is me, because if they're just assertive or outspoken or just a disruptor, well, those are not bad things, are they? Maybe I'm the one who's too sensitive. Social media, the internet, the way the world runs now, was all purpose-built for narcissistic people to succeed. And that means the sane washing isn't going to stop anytime soon. In some ways, these platforms only work when you have lots of narcissistic people because they really use them to entertain and get attention. Understanding these patterns, the low likelihood that these patterns are going to change, and the high likelihood that in the long term, being around these patterns is not good for you is crucial. Powerful people will always be narcissistic. That will never change. We would be doing everyone a favor if we just called a duck instead of pretending that it's a swan. Other people can sane wash all they want, the media, people around you, but once you really get this, you can't unsee it. And the toxicity of these behaviors and these patterns will always come through. Knowledge is power, folks, and listen, protect yourself. One thing I would suggest is don't let the sane washers know that you are onto it. Silently understanding the narcissism and the narcissistic behaviors in your midst, that's often the best strategy of all. You can't win a poker game if you show your hand. And you can't manage a narcissistic situation if you call it out. Don't let the sane washing of the media, of the world at large, even of the people around you confuse you. There's this fantasy the world maintains that everyone can be reasoned with. Once you recognize that not everyone can, you will save yourself a world of time, pain, and hurt. So the media can sane wash all they want and soft pedal on what is clearly narcissistic behavior. Hopefully, through all the sources of information out there on narcissism, you realize it's different. Doesn't mean you have to engage about it, and certainly your role in the world is not to prove someone is engaging in narcissistic behavior to someone who doesn't want to see it that way and prefers to see that person as just charismatic or engaging or a big personality. You can know the truth, and then you know how to navigate it better. And the sane washers are just going to sane wash to make this all, to maintain whatever fantasy or vision of the world they want. But don't let the media's myopia stop you from seeing what are really phenomena that not only are doing individuals a lot of harm, it's harming the world at large. This question comes up a lot from folks who are from narcissistic family systems. It's one of the most complicated spaces because the harm done by narcissistic families is quite deep. It affects your sense of self, your identity, how you go through the world, how you talk to yourself. So that's enough harm. Sadly, these patterns almost never resolve in families. So your ongoing contact with a family is rarely going to be healthy. Now, many people don't feel they can go fully no contact. And there may be a wide array of reasons for this, from the practical, cultural, duty, obligation, or perhaps there are some family members you do like, and having to endure your narcissistic parent as part of being able to still interact with them. Your reasons are your reasons. But you also know that the ongoing contact with a narcissistic family system takes a toll, just the nature of the beast. But some of you, however, did decide to go no contact or really cut off most contact, and that is no small decision. It's actually quite galling when people look at people who are estranged from their families and accuse them of taking the easy way out. I actually think that the decision to cut away from a family system is one of the more difficult things a person can do. Some people do it somewhat abruptly, knowing that if they were to try to explain themselves to their family, that they would end up even more abused, gaslighted, and it would only set them back, or that they would be vulnerable to the manipulations that the family was engaging in that would pull them back in. Some people sort of do their no contact in pieces. They try their best to connect to the narcissistic parent or the narcissistic family system. Then they start gradually going lower and lower and lower contact, and then they're all out. It's painful because you may be trying to only excise or cut out one family member, like just one parent or a sibling. But it does tend to end up being an all or nothing deal, since these are deeply enabled family systems in which even the folks you like a little may be chronically be putting the push on you to reconcile. So some of you are going to go no contact. And this will carry with it the label of you being estranged from your family. There's a lot of bias against this, and I'm always struck by the bias people carry against familial estrangement. It happens. You had no choice or say in these people that were assigned to you as family. It was the roll of the dice. And as anyone who plays dice will tell you, they actually roll wrong more often than they roll right. So if your luck didn't hold out and you are in a system that was rigid, harmful, manipulative, resistant to change, distancing yourself to protect yourself, to save yourself, is a difficult, but for many people a necessary choice. The bigger issue really comes up when you have to sort of take this out into the world. How do you navigate sharing this, that you're estranged from your family? How do you go about doing that with the world? It amazes me how undeveloped so many people's frontal lobes are well into adulthood, and that they feel that they have the right to ask intrusive questions, get an answer, and then be judgmental or even more intrusive about your answer. So here are some thoughts about how you navigate this issue of family estrangement if you're out in the world. First of all, you got to remember, you owe nobody the details of your life. If you have grown up in a narcissistic family, problematic boundaries came with the territory. And experiencing intrusiveness from them, and then experiencing their withdrawal, if you ask for something that they didn't want to be bothered with, that comes with the territory. You lose your personal sovereignty when you grow up in a narcissistic family system. So safeguarding yourself is so important in the aftermath of experiencing this. And part of that means that you may be quite protective when it comes to sharing about yourself. And all of this falls under that idea of discernment. The details of your family or familial estrangement may still be quite painful, and even something that you still have difficulty processing. So if you decide that you do not want to share it, then that is your right and your privilege. Somebody says to you, tell me about your family. Do you talk to them very often? You can just give a vague, I don't know, we haven't been that in touch. I'm sure that they're fine. You can give them that kind of vague answer and then change the subject. If that other person pushes you, you can then say, yeah, I don't have much to say about it. If they push even more, step away or say, I don't think you're hearing me. I'd prefer not to talk about it. And by the way, at that point, it's a them thing, definitely not a you thing. And secondly, if you do decide to talk about it or feel you can, again, you decide how much to share. You may decide to take the path of being bold. You might say, my mother's a raging narcissist. She did enough damage and I am not allowing her to do more. And then you sit back and wait for their response. If you're lucky, the other person will get it and let you know that they are sorry, or maybe even share a similar story. If you're not as lucky, the other person may judge or criticize or be rude. Again, this is why discernment becomes so important. You feel something coming out, or if they're coming at you, if you feel someone coming at you with an interrogation, that may not be the person to share any of this with. If the person is asking vague questions and not demanding answers, or you're dealing with someone who's been empathic when you've dealt with them in the past, or even during your interaction with them, maybe you decide to tread in slowly on the topic. And third, you may also decide to take the middle ground and say, we're no longer in contact. It has been complicated and painful, but this is my choice. I'm okay, and I'd prefer to not talk about it. A healthy person will receive that and say, got it, thanks for sharing, and I'm sorry you went through that. An intrusive, judgy person may say any number of things like, oh, come on, how bad could a family will be? Or my favorite is that they will tell you, you better be careful. You may regret that someday. Be careful. Ask yourself how you will feel when they die, as though you did not do this multiple times. Your estrangement, your history with your family is your business, nobody else's. And frankly, this experience and how other people receive it becomes a great litmus test. If someone hears about your experience of estrangement and is unable to hear it with respect, empathy, and compassion, they really are not someone who you keep close. A sort of keep them on the list of the need-to-know basis kind of person. And you also do not need to be the estrangement teacher. The judgmentalness, the intrusiveness, and the I have the answers arrogance of someone who critiques your difficult life and decision, that, again, is a reflection on them and their poor boundaries, and maybe even their toxicity. The hard work for any of us is to not internalize that. These judgmental encounters can feel like a recapitulation of all of the toxic stuff that happened within your narcissistic family. And you often need a second to get your legs back under you again when you're dealing with someone who's critiquing this. The obsession with family at any cost has done irreparable harm to many survivors of familial narcissistic abuse. Listen, in the casino of life, some folks just sit at a cold table and end up in a family that does not do right by them. Throwing good money after bad never works. Narcissistic family systems are about projected shame, about a parent projecting their self-shame and judgments on their own children so they can walk around feeling great about themselves and their children carry that burden. That's enough shame for one lifetime. Navigating these situations means discernment, assessing your level of comfort, and also sniffing out whether these are people who can be respectful with your experience. If they can't, then stick with a party line. And if someone asks you straight out, why aren't you in touch with your family? You can respond, they just weren't good for me. Because they weren't. So I know that getting help when you are going through something difficult can feel daunting. Therapy can be expensive. It can be hard to access. Therapists may not take your insurance. Your insurance may not cover enough sessions. You can't get the time away from work to even see the therapist. The therapists themselves, because this is not something we're teaching in graduate schools yet, may not know how narcissism works, how it shows up in relationships, how it affects people. And then there is so much stuff, information, content online, But no online content is ever going to be a substitute for therapy, not ever. And to have to sift through all that content is like going through a bargain bin at a thrift store. You keep sorting through it, you keep trying to find treasure as you sort through tons of other people's junk, and you still may go home with junk. Now, there are some fantastic books out there written by some fantastic therapists who have taken some really difficult concepts and shared them in a way that can leave us feeling less confused and more understood and give us the information that we need to sometimes feel more stable. Now, as I have navigated through grief during the past 6 months, myself personally, I have read book after book, watched so many videos, and read posts, and some of it was really helpful, some of it was absolute crap, and none of it was therapy. In the past many months, I have also been to, and actually in the past many years, frankly, I have been to and I've spoken at a variety of wellness-oriented programs. As part of that, I would be given wellness-oriented books, like they give me like a gift to send me home with. Now, these are far, far less often written by people who have any training whatsoever in the field of mental health. Every so often, some of these books are written by physicians or physical therapists or dietitians, but a lot are written by someone who's just simply been through something, not have any professional training in any kind of healthcare, not even mental health care, nothing of any kind. Because they were given to me for free, I read these books out of curiosity. I personally don't find them helpful, but I'm also a cynic. But I also read them with an eye, always with the eye, of what would be helpful for people navigating narcissistic relationships. There is a point at which, once you understand the narcissistic stuff and you make decisions and figure out how to navigate it and get therapy for the emotional complexities, there is a point at which it isn't just things like, do I gray rock? Do I yellow rock? Do I go no contact? But rather, it is, how do I build out my life in ways that are healthy and meaningful for me? Which is great. The challenge is that people will sometimes put this wellness cart before the horse. People will read these books about aspiration and growth and perfection optimization diets before they make sense of the often emotionally abusive mess that they're in. Now, a lot of the more growthy, aspiration-y, sometimes even folk wisdom-y books are tricky when you are in the early phases of identifying the narcissistic patterns of your relationship and beginning to heal, because they presume something that many, if not most people who have gone through relational trauma, relational abuse, betrayal trauma, narcissistic relationships, antagonistic relationships, what none of those folks have, right? Which is safety, or any kind of a clean canvas, the freedom to make choices easily and enact them without a lot of negative emotions inside. In the long game, we hope for that for survivors. I hope for that for survivors. But for folks who can't get out of antagonistic systems and relationships, there are still sandbags keeping you on the ground, which is pretty much most people who have been through these kinds of relationships. So the problem with some, if not a lot of this guidance and these books on sort of wellness is that they can be quite shamey for survivors who are going through these narcissistic relationships. Listen, I have sat through many of these talks so I can figure out what these folks are saying. A lot of it has sort of a TED Talk vibe, like, I'm going to introduce you to the person who is blocking you from your fullest potential. This person is your worst enemy. I am going to be the one to allow you to meet the stranger that stops you and sabotages. Are you ready? Are you ready to meet this person? Well, I want you to look at the person sitting next to you because they're looking at that person. Yep, it's you. I tend to be the only person in the audience who doesn't laugh at that point. A lot of the rhetoric in these kinds of wellness aspiration books is you can change your mindset. You can let it go. You can go out tomorrow and change your destiny. You can will things with the power of your mind. And if you don't, well, then that's on you. Not enough power, I guess. Some of it's the whole forgiveness shelf. Forgiveness is the path to everything. Probably not. Too many of these approaches, talks, and books are not trauma-informed. And they can leave a survivor of narcissistic relationships or frankly any form of abusive, traumatizing relationships who go and pick up these books too fast, wondering if after all, maybe it was me because I'm the one who's not getting out of my own way. I have sat through these lectures where people in the audience are told, the most important choice you make is the person you marry. And if you marry the wrong person, well, that's on you. Well, that ship sailed for most of us. With absolutely no tips and feedback on what to do if indeed you might have married the wrong person for you. Other than to turn around and say, well, you just married the broken part of yourself. And wouldn't a couples retreat be just what you need? Being locked in the middle of nowhere with someone who manipulates you and is a malcontent is probably not only not going to work, it's going to set you back. Or it's going to create another pseudo honeymoon, which just further ramps up the confusion again. It dawned on me that the books and the guidance, if you take the whole stew of self-help, mental health, the helpy help books out there, they seem to kind of be designed for two different groups of people, the survivors and the optimizers. It's like having two sets of cookbooks. One group of cookbooks about what is safe to eat in nature and how to start a fire with very little and be able to purify water and survive until help comes, and another book on how to make really fancy cakes. If I'm in the wilderness, let me tell you what I don't need is a damn book on how to make a fancy cake. So listen, my hope is all survivors end up being to do all this optimizing stuff, to pull books off that optimizing shelf. But like I said, if I'm lost in the desert without enough water and not sure where to go, I need guidance on how to navigate that hostile landscape I'm in. I do not need someone talking to me about how I keep making the same mistakes. When you don't feel safe, when you're just trying to get through the day, when you're chronically hypervigilant, you aren't thinking about self-actualizing. It's very similar in the world of narcissistic and betraying relationships. When you are in it and still figuring it out and wondering, am I this bad, incompetent, weak, complaining, selfish person that I'm being told that I am? If that's what you're going through, you need survivor side books. Books on trauma, on healing, on betrayal, on narcissism, and how all of these things show up in relationships. These are not books that promise magic or that you will become the wizard of yourself or live to be 180 years old by cold plunging and meditating with a gong, but rather books that really share in clear terms what betrayal and trauma or abuse do to your body, your mind, your sense of self. You need to be ungaslighted, get more clarity of mind, and be reminded that a person should not be blamed for their own abuse. Now, the other set of books are what I call, like I said, the optimizer side books. And I have to say, this is a lot, if not most, of the books and content on that self-help shelf in your bookstore. The optimizers are the folks who are trying to live more efficiently, healthily, live a really, really, really long time, or at least a really long time in a very healthy way. That's all wonderful. That's not to say that this optimizer group hasn't been through some stuff, real stuff, hard stuff. Some have. And hopefully they did the work on that. And they can now work on growth and health. But optimizers and survivors are at different places in the process. And one size of guidance doesn't fit all. My biggest challenge with the optimizer shelf is the shaming. The idea that what is in this book or in this video isn't working for you because of you. Heaven forbid it be because the advice in the book or the seminar may not be readily accessible for people either with normal responsibilities and regular amounts of money or people who are in really harmful relationships. Blaming people for their own misery without digging in a bit deeper is not only not okay, it's a setback. I'm all for autonomy and individuation and choice and subjectivity. But we have to recognize context. It's really hard to focus on growth and just letting things go and making autonomous decisions and changing your mindset when you are living in an upside-down, subjugated, gaslighted universe where you still are trying to figure out what is real in real life and if the sky is even blue. I work on the survivor side. That's what I do. When it comes to optimizing and waking up at 4 a.m. and meditating and jumping into a drum of ice and drinking kale and only eating ancient grains and chronotype sleeping, I'm not your girl. But I have spent my career witnessing people, even coming into my therapy office, clenching their latest copy of a self-help book that was from the optimizer shelf, while simultaneously self-abandoning so they can make an emotionally abusive relationship work. No pithy self-help book with a 5-step plan is ever going to be more important than the hard work of working through attachment wounds, the bodily held trauma, the belief that to be loved, you have to quit yourself. The patterns of these relationships and the reality that in the relationship many people are in, they are literally almost being asked or told to abandon themselves. To be in a narcissistic relationship is to carry the bag of shame that the narcissistic people choose not to carry. Love with a narcissistic person requires sacrificing our true selves and to be the luggage handler for their shame. If you simply can put that shame down, connect with yourself, and even if you can't, won't, or don't leave or disconnect from the relationship, just to be able to see it clearly. So you recognize that you do have some agency once you can break out of that system of the narcissistic person. That it's not all fawn response and appeasing all the time, but rather healing is that you can navigate these situations with wisdom, realistic expectations, and awareness, and grief, and always be ready for that grief. Just when you think you got it all figured out, it comes in like a tidal wave. Kale, cold plunges, meditations at dawn, I'm sure those are all lovely things. But if you are trying to make sense of an emotionally abusive situation, maybe don't need to be at the top of your priority list. And it's important you don't shame yourself or feel shamed for not jumping right into that your life, your choices mindset when you are still trying to navigate a harmful, abusive space so you can come back to reality and safety, and a harmful and an abusive space that no one else is seeing clearly either. The challenge for me as somebody who speaks not only to thousands of survivors, but trains thousands of therapists and also works individually with some survivors, is this sense that there can be such a pull to do the thing that feels more accessible. It's a 5-point plan is a lot more appealing. Somebody's saying, mix your Greek yogurt with this thing that you grew in your garden and say 10 things and follow these steps and wake up at 4 in the morning. There is something appealing about that, right? Because they feel like actionable steps and they don't feel like the much more amorphous sense of how do I stop abandoning myself or even recognizing that you are, right? So then we're like, oh, this is me. I'm just a lazy person that doesn't want to get up at 4 a.m. and meditate. No, could also be that you were tossing and turning all night at the 10 gaslighted things you heard the day before, or just are caught up in the wonder of, am I such a bad person? Or even the anxiety that tends to pervade the experience of survivors. So no, there's no 5-step plan. Trust me, folks, if there was, I'd be telling you about it. Healing, growth, survival from harmful relationships, that is heavy, hard work. It's a little different for everybody. And there is no trick, no quick bit. But I'll tell you, when I go through the airports and I see the books that are screaming at me of self-improvement, I'm thinking, damn, I can't access this stuff. I got too much going on. If it was as simple as change how you think, I wouldn't have a job. And I wish I didn't. Thanks again.